Now, Caranthir is a Wild Hunt unit. Wild Hunt does have a distinct archetype. Caranthir is a 4-strength body at an 8-strength provision cost. Deploy. Spawn a 1-power copy of a unit from your hand on this unit's row. Now, if you play a game called Hearthstone, you might think this ability is very similar to a card called Barnes. Also, I will be making a lot of references to Hearthstone and Magic because now that these cards have a cost, their abilities can be balanced as far as how many insane things you can put in your deck. So you're going to see a lot of cards that have very, very interesting abilities that you might recognize sort of from other games translated into this game. It's more present than ever because of the way we can evaluate these cards is different and better now. Because we're not just saying it's a gold card, so if it doesn't do 20, it's going to suck. Or it's a gold card, and when it does 10, it sucks. We're not going to be making those arguments anymore because each individual slot is now dictated by how much it costs you to put in the deck. Very, 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 very cool stuff. So that's one card that I'm going to preview here. I'll preview another one. Let's see. And I'll be going through every card. Remember, I'll be going through every card. This is a card that I just love. This is the new Necker. Now, Necker is now a new kind of weenie card. Doesn't work with Consume, but don't worry, Consume is very much alive and well. But the Necker is now a card with the new unit, it's a new keyword called Thrive. Now, Thrive is an exclusive monsters ability in which every time a unit appears on the board that is a higher power than this card is boosted by 1. And this creates 2 of those units. So it's actually a very good card in a long round that actually doesn't really have a ceiling. Kind of. It has a soft ceiling. But this is a good example of how a 4 provision cost card, the lowest cost card that you can put in your deck, actually has a lot of potential in a long round. You're encouraged to play it in round 1. You're encouraged to play it in a long round, and it has a lot of synergy with the rest of your deck. I would imagine that Necker is going to be a core card for almost every monster deck because of how cheap it is and how valuable it is in almost every way. And every faction has a card that's like this. A card that just seems like, damn, I just want to put it into every deck. But the Thrive component is exclusive to monsters. So you have that. Now, I'm not going to go through every keyword right now, but I will talk about deploy and order. So deploy is enter the battlefield type thing. If you've been playing Gwent for a long time, deploy is a keyword that is returning to make sure that you understand that when this card enters the field from hand, you play it on the board, it does this thing. There are cards that care about deploy effects. There are cards that re-trigger deploy effects. And deploy is essentially a faster effect in which your opponent cannot stop this effect from going off. Now, when you look at a card like Order, I'll show a new card that we haven't seen yet. Well, let's look at Merck Toboggan. So Merck Toboggan is very much a card that exists very similar to how she is on Live. Merck Toboggan being a 10 provision cost card that has 4 strength. She's still a dragon. She has an order to damage an enemy by 2, and she has 2 charges. So this means that while Merck Toboggan cannot do this damage on the turn you play her, next turn she gives you a 4 damage reach because you can play all the charges in the same turn. Also, this card cares about cards that give a unit charges. It also cares about cards that care about dragons. However, this card is a vulnerable card because when you play it, anything that can hit 4 damage can remove it. And there are a lot of cards at 10 provision cost and 4 power that have very strong effects that you have to activate the next turn. So it actually makes the 4 damage ability price point very interesting when evaluating some of the lower strength cards. And that's actually something that I decided to specialize in. When I went into the PTR, I paid very, very close attention to the cards that were 4 to 6 provisions for every faction. But I kind of realized that as I was looking at it. So that's the basic idea. But I'm going to go through all the keywords now because I want to talk about faction identity. So the first thing we're going to look at is monsters. and the monster faction identity. So monster faction identity, monsters are all about thrive, swarming the board, consuming cards, death wish effects, and a new ability I like to call supremacy, but it is the Wild Hunt tribal effect that cares about if your board has the highest strength unit on the board, which is a really cool effect when you get to see Eridan's ability. Monsters also have control over the organic realm, in that monsters have a tutor for organic cards, as they do in Live with Wispus Tribute. They also have a lot of great control options because they are one of the two factions that have immune units and care about immunity. They also have a faction dragon, so any deck that cares about dragons, monsters can play that, so you can play dragon monsters. And they also, I believe, have cards that care about beasts. A lot of monsters are classified as beasts. But things like dragon, beasts, and control elements, more important for Arena, because there are other cards in other factions and neutral cards that care about things like beasts and dragons and, you know, general control elements like Elzer's Thunder and stuff like that. But Thrive, Swarm, Consume, Death Wish, and Supremacy. So Thrive, as I mentioned, is an ability that if a unit enters the battlefield, if a unit is played from hand that has a higher strength than the unit on the field, it grows. So I showed the Necker as an example, and Necker is very similar, if you follow Magic the Gathering, to a card called Experiment 1, or a card that was just released called Pelt Collector. Very, very similar to that. So you can see the value. Both of those cards I mentioned are also 1-drops in Magic, which represent kind of the same vein of what a 4 provision cost card in Gwent is going to represent. So you see that this is just going to be a high value card, and what a good 4 provision cost card looks like. Now, let's talk about Swarm. Here's an example of a Swarm card, Erika's Nest. Now, Erika's Nest is replacing the art for Monster Nest. It is a 4 provision special card that spawns 4 Erikas with 1 power on an allied row. So you get 4 bodies worth 4 strength, 4 provisions, but everything that cares about units loves this card. And you remember seeing on the dev stream a card called Elf and Onion Soup that destroys 2 units on the board? Well, this gives you 2 really low-cost bronze units to get a little bit of extra value out of out of Elf and Onion Soup. But this gives me a really, really exciting moment to show you the new leader, Erika's Queen. This leader is wildly different from anything else we've ever had in Gwent. This is a leader that is a passive ability. It is very similar to having an Erika's Behemoth on Live on the board permanently at any time, all the time. Every time you destroy an ally unit, consume or otherwise, you get 1 strength back as a unit. Very cool card. What is the drawback to Erika's Queen? She only gets 1 mulligan. Okay? Very interesting way of balancing this card. Feedback on open beta will judge how we feel about this card, but this is your Swarm leader, and a lot of insectoids care about it. Really, really cool. Again, if you're just tuning into the podcast, playgwent.com/open-ptr is the address you need to go to get started and play. You can play right now. But I'm going through overview. Now let's talk about Consume. Consume doesn't really have a leader. However, I would say that Erika's Queen is most likely to be that leader because it cares about destroying allied units. But there's also cards that care about Death Wish. But I just want to talk about Consume because it is a monster. It is a monster. It is a monster-specific thing. Now, don't get alarmed when I type Consume into the deck builder and you only see a certain amount of cards. This is okay because when I say that the faction identity is about Thrive, Swarm, Consume, Death Wish, and Supremacy, caring about the highest unit on your board, you should know that you can mix and match these, and a lot of leaders work well with mixing and matching these things, and your preference can lean as hard into each archetype as you want. But you would still have space for techs, you still have space for control stuff, you still have space for some of your favorite cards that might be expensive, like Muzzle, or other cards that are really expensive that work very similar. So you can go full Consume and still have a lot of breathing room. So that's a good thing. Don't take that the wrong way. That's a good thing. So let's look at actually 2 cards that are very similar for Consume. Slizzard is a 5 provision cost that is a 4 strength body that consumes an allied unit on its row, very much like Vran, but also like Vran, you have to activate it after you play it. Actually, that's not true. Current live Vran gets an on-play effect, but this Slizzard does not get that. Now, you can also look at Barbaghasi. The premium sound effects are playing, which is a 6 provision card at 5 strength. Boy, that premium sound effect is long. That consumes an allied unit, has 2 charges, so it can do it twice the next turn, but it can only do it twice. So it's kind of like Forktail. It has the ability of getting 2 effects off in a single turn, whereas Slizzard can't do that, but Slizzard can potentially do more in a long round. So it's a very similar comparison to Vran Warrior and Forktail on live right now. So you do still have those interesting decisions for consume. So let's talk about Death Wish, because Death Wish cares about consume as well. Now you notice right away Unseen Elder shows up as a leader. So Death Wish, Unseen Elder is a pretty good leader for it. Death Wish, you can trigger your ally's Death Wish, any ally, gold or bronze, and you can do it every round. That's pretty good. I need to take a sip of water. Every round you can activate this ability, so much like Bran was shown on stream. This is a leader that has more than one a charge, but the charges only rebuild every round refresh. Some leaders have multiple charges that they can play anytime at all. This one is on a round refresh, and it triggers an ally Death Wish. So that's very good. You will always have that ability. Also, you have cards like Bea, which is a 7 provision gold card, which is 3 strength. Also rocking that sweet, sweet Thrive ability, which I love. But also has the deploy effect of triggering a bronze ally's Death Wish. Now you might say, I gotta pay 7 provisions for a card like that? No, there's a bronze card that does it too, and it's Maelorn. 5 provisions, 3 body, also triggers a bronze ally's Death Wish ability. You will also find that there is a neutral card that does the same thing, because Death Wish is also on neutral cards, and some very, very strong gold cards are Death Wish cards that any faction can use. So there is a neutral Death Wish trigger, but it's a special card. It's my very, very near and dear to my heart Crow's Eye. 4 provisions for a special card that triggers a bronze unit's Death Wish. So that's how Death Wish is looking. Now, there's obviously, we're going to go through every card, so we're going to go through all of it. And the last thing I want to talk about is Supremacy. Now, this I really like. This is not the official keyword. I just like calling it that. There is no official keyword for this effect, but I'll show you the effect here. Here's Wild Hunt Navigator. Now, Wild Hunt Navigator is a 4 provision cost unit with a 2 strength body. On a deploy, she boosts an allied unit by 1, but if you have the highest unit on the board on your side, she's stronger. Almost every Wild Hunt unit cares about this, and I think it's a really cool effect because of Eridan. Eridan is so good. Eridan is a leader that not only has 4 mulligans, which is a lot, to be completely honest. 4 mulligans is a lot for an ability that can lock down a round for you. So Eridan's ability locks down a round for you because you can play a very vulnerable unit like the aforementioned shown, like Gaunter, something that needs to be activated the next turn, or something that has a very strong ongoing effect. Not only can you protect that unit, and that unit sticks around for you that whole round because now it's immune, barring a Scorch, isn't going to be messed with, but also likely gives you the highest unit on the board that can't be hit. So Eridan has crazy round potential with that, but also you can play your really strong cards in round 1, and you can fix the hell out of your hand in later rounds with 4 mulligans. Actually very, very good. So Eridan is maybe one of my favorite monster leaders. I'll show you a couple other things that care about highest units. I think Nithril. Nithril is one. Not all the premium sounds are in the game, but some of them are. So sometimes you'll hear them trigger and sometimes you hear them won't. So Nithril is a 6 provision cost, 5 strength gold card that when you deploy it, he can destroy an enemy artifact. Now that's pretty good to have as a tech option. But if you are also in control of the highest unit, it damages adjacent units by 2, which it makes this card actually very high value. A high end of a 9 strength card that also destroys an artifact for 6 provisions is nutty value. That is definitely really, really up there, and you run Nithril for sure. Now, there are cards that care about tribal in general, while not a lot of cards care about Wild Hunt, although the Wild Hunt Warrior does. The Wild Hunt Warrior does care about Wild Hunt. 5 provision cost, 3 strength bronze unit. Deploy damage a unit by 1 for each Wild Hunt unit on this row. It has a reach of 1, which means that it needs to be played on the melee row and can only hit the melee row, which means that you need to be playing your Wild Hunt units on the melee row. And your opponent cares about that, and you care about that. However, not a lot of units care about Wild Hunt, but there are some really cool tribal cards like Doppler. Now, Doppler is, just to talk about tribal in general, Doppler is a neutral bronze. Now, they talked about this. This is a 7 provision cost unit that starts at 1 strength, but you choose a unit in your hand and you boost self by the amount of other units that share its primary category. So if Wild Hunt is the primary category, this unit drops at a higher strength level. Unfortunately, I think this card is too high costed because 7 is the upper range of bronzes, and it seems like you're probably not going to get a higher than like a 7 or an 8 out of it. But adding a neutral card that can get you that kind of value for provision spend is good, but there's also no real rewards for including neutral bronzes specifically. So I just think this card could be 6 personally, but it does give you extra push if you really, really want to focus on tribal, and it works for any deck that does that. Any deck. So any tribal matters with Doppler a little bit more. So I really like that. That's important for elves, dwarves, dryads, soldiers, specters. We'll talk about specters, my friends. Warriors, humans, Wild Hunt, mages. There's a lot of tribes still. A lot of tribes still. Eridan out of the dumpster. It's one of the only things I've read. A dead symbol. Good to see. Shout out to a dead symbol. So that's monsters for you. Let's go on to the next. Let's talk about... Oh, wait. There's one more thing I'm going to talk about. One last thing. And the cards that didn't change in Monsters, if you liked Monsters. So, first of all, this is kind of like a playlist, so I can go through them really quick. So, Erika's Queen as a leader is very similar to Erika's Behemoth. Werewolf is very similar. 4 strength immune unit. Drowner is very similar. Moves a unit. Slizzard is similar to Vran Warrior. Foglet is similar as it's a thinning unit, although it's very different in that it's a Death Wish. Harpy Egg is similar in that you're still trying to get the Harpy out of the egg and crack that egg. Maelorn is similar in that it's very similar to a Death Wish trigger. Runestones are still in the game, but you can only have 1 of them, and the provision cost is 6, and it creates a Bronze Faction card. Bronze Faction cards, upper limit is 7, and there's not very many of them. So this is generally creating a card at a bad rate for a chance of having more than 2 of a bronze card. Don't worry about the runestones, and don't worry about this create, just for that reason. We'll see. But runestones are actually fairly priced for what they do. Selena Harpy is very much like current Barbagazi in that it just consumes the unit on play, but it's not resilient. Cyclops does very much the same thing. Barbagazi does very much the same thing as Forktail with the new order restriction. Parasite does very much the same thing. Abea is a Death Wish trigger, so that's just in the game. Ghoul does very much the same thing. K-Ran does very much the same thing as live Erika's Queen, and very much the same thing as old K-Ran. So some throwbacks right here in that K-Ran plays and consumes 3 allies on order, but it has the Zeal keyword, which means it can do it right away. K-Ran is back, baby. Osrel, very similar to it is on live. Wispus Tribute plays an organic card, very similar to how it is on live. Morntart, very similar to how it is on live. Gravehag. Weavis Incantation is very similar to Toad Prince on live. That's it. And a lot of other effects are returning. If you didn't see something you like, I could have missed it. I also am not talking about neutral cards. And there are cards that are similar to live cards, but are like kind of fixed. Like maybe they were too strong before and they're different now, or they're priced too high, or they're spiritual successors. But don't worry if you didn't see something you like, because it's probably back in a new and interesting way. Cool. Monsters in the bag.